This is an interview with Rhoda Sarnat on October 20th, 1998, in her home. The interviewer is Frances Lomas Feldman. Rhoda, tell me a little about your background. Where were you born, and something about your family?
I was born in Chicago in 1915, cesarean section, to a mother who was in her early 40s, and a father who was about 45 and already a grandfather.
He'd been married before.
He'd been married before. My mother was his second wife. His first wife had died. And his oldest child, Helen Gruenberg, was married and had a child at the time I was born. I had two other half-siblings, Elsie, who was 12 years older, and Ralph Waldo Gerard, who was 15 years older. I was born into a highly intellectualized family. My father was, I use the word carefully, a genius. He not only spoke 5 languages, he went through the entire seminary preparing to become rabbi, as was traditional for the oldest boy in their families to do. But when he completed the work, discovered that he was really not a suitable man for a rabbi, as he was an agnostic, if not an atheist. So he quit it and went into mathematics, where he taught at the University of Birmingham in England, taught mathematics. And then when he came to this country a few years before I was born with his first wife.
Where had he been born?
He was born in Poland, Warsaw. As a matter of fact, his grandfather was the great Grand Rabbi of Warsaw.
But then as an adult, he went to England. He went to England as an adult.
Yes, he went to England with his first wife. There he studied mathematics and became a math professor. He was a whiz at math. After she died, he moved to this country, and my mother, who was his first wife's best friend, became his second wife.
She had not been married before.
No, she had not been. She had been proposed to by many suitors, including the president of Wall Pen Company and others, but she was determined to marry for love and not for money. So she waited until she was about 40 before she got married, which in those days was quite a risk. She was a high school teacher of home economics and excellent in all those areas, which is why I tended to go in the opposite direction.
Then you grew up with 3 half-siblings.
Yes. Now, my brother Ralph, of course, was an internationally famous person in the field of neurophysiology, has written many textbooks that are used all over the world, and he too, in his way, was a very brilliant man, if irascible, which I might say my dad was too. They both had the same set of genes, brilliance and irascibility.
Quite a combination.
Not easy to live with. Ralph married Margaret Gerard, who was an outstanding psychoanalyst and one of the charter members of the Chicago Institute, and also hell to live with. She was wonderful as a therapist, they say, but as a relative, forget it. She was miserable to her mother. and to us. My sister married Ralph Colton, whose father was the rabbi in Omaha for many years. And he was a lovely, charming, devoted husband. They never had any children.
And you yourself were born in Chicago.
I was born in Chicago, and at the age of 7, we moved to New York City, and the reason given to me as a 7-year-old, being torn from the arms of my friends, my school, and everything familiar, was to be near the stock market. My dad was invested with Benjamin Graham, who is well known to this day in financial circles, was the mentor and teacher of Warren Buffett. He was my first cousin, and my dad lent him the money to get started in the investment business. So that's why we moved to New York. We first moved to the Bronx, then we were in Manhattan, then we were in Brooklyn, then in their wisdom, my dad being retired in his early 50s, decided to spend 2 years in Europe. Took me along, again another wrench, and plunked me in a German-speaking Swiss boarding school called Professor Buser's Töchter Institute.
Say that again.
Professor Buser's, B-U-S-E-R, Töchter Institute in Teufen, which was in the Alps about 2 hours away from Zurich, where only German was spoken.
Did you know German when you went there?
I knew no German. I didn't know Ja from nein or nein from Ja. And for 3 weeks I was not allowed to join my classmates in their classes because I didn't know German. So the first 3 weeks, when I was so homesick I could have died and would have liked to have died, I was all alone. I would go into the little cubby holes where they kept the pianos called Überzimmer, shut the door, and cry my heart out. I couldn't communicate. 3 weeks.
How old were you then?
10.
10.
And why? Because my dad wanted, in Europe, he knew all the languages, he was very comfortable. They would spend 3 months at Lake Lugano, 3 months at Lake Como, 3 months here, 3 months there. Every once in a while they'd come back to Zurich, and one of the teachers would accompany me there, and I would spend a couple of hours. And I'll never forget one lunch. I was crying, my dad was crying, my mother was crying, but back I went. They felt I needed my education, and that was the most important thing. By the time the year was up, I had made such good friends. My 2 best friends were Hilda Sommer from Frankfurt, Germany, and Yolanda Frugoli from Milan, Italy, which was ironic since we were headed into the Second World War and both countries were our enemies. And I always hoped in my heart of hearts that it would help them to have known me to be a little softer on our country. I never saw either one of them again, although we corresponded for some time in German. And then as those things will, we lost touch. I went, when we got back to New York, I went to a public grammar school, number 161, and then to a public high school. But my very irked with the school. They were enormous schools with an enormous impersonality to them. And the final tip-off, the final straw, was when, after a Labor Day holiday, I was terribly sunburned to the point of blistering all over and pain all over. And I got home to school a little late because my mother had to help me dress. It was almost unendurable to have something touch my skin. So I got there about 30 minutes late, was sent to the principal's office and punished. And as far as my dad was concerned, that was it.
How were you punished?
I wasn't allowed privileges. I was scolded. And actually, I should have been patted gently on the back for even showing up. I was in such bad shape. Mm-hmm. Well, my father was absolutely furious, and they decided to shift me to a very fine private high school in Manhattan, at Horace Mann. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was a very fine school. The girls were in the Manhattan campus across the street from Columbia, 160th and Broadway. The boys were up in Van Cortlandt Park, and never the twain did meet. So all of us, here we were in our teens, we would cut out pictures of handsome boys and put them on our walls.
And move back to the European school. Was that for girls only?
Yes, girls from the ages of 6 to 18.
So that in both schools you were in a segregated situation.
That's right, that's right, which was most unfortunate, because I was very uneasy with boys at that time, and at the same time wanting their company very much, and afraid and shy. I was shy anyway, from birth. Graduated from Horace Mann, and that was in 1930, I believe. And of course, the Big Depression occurred in 1929, when my dad lost $100,000, which was a great deal of money. We had been living in a lovely high-rise apartment at 86 and West End Avenue and could no longer afford it. So that's when we moved to California, where the cost of living was infinitesimal comparatively. That's what caused us to move here.
That was in 1930.
That was 1930. I was only 15 and a half, and my folks rightly felt I was too young for college. So they sent me to Hollywood Secretarial School for a year, where I learned typing, which has certainly come in very handy, stenotype, and all the other things that you learn in a business college. After a year and having attained the wise old age of 16 and a half, I entered UCLA, where I graduated 4 years later with a psychology major because I had made up my mind I wanted to go into social work early.
What caused you to decide that?
Well, I really wanted to be a psychiatrist because I, from my earliest years, always tried to figure out why people acted as they did, behaved as they did, felt as they did. It was a burning curiosity. And so I wanted to go into a profession that would give me the answers. My folks were not able to support me through medical school and all of that training, so I learned about social work through Helen Gruenberg, who was the first social worker in private practice in Los Angeles. She and her family were living out here at that time.
And your first cousin?
My first cousin. And she told me, I thought, now that's for me. And that's how I got into social work.
I didn't realize that Helen had influenced.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I did an oral history interview with her not long ago,
did you?
so we have that on file.
I'd be interested, yeah. She didn't realize it at the time. I didn't say it to her. but she opened the door. And I must say I've never regretted it. It's been one of the blessings of my life. We had to move back. We didn't have to, but we moved back to Chicago. My dad had died when I was a sophomore at UCLA. And my mother, we had a home in Beverly Hills at that time, 301 North Oakhurst Drive. And I had to go to the graduate school in Chicago, which was considered one of the finest in the country.
Was going to school your primary reason for returning to Chicago?
Yes. There was one school I've been told. I've been told that SC had a school of social work, but that they didn't have much by way of field work at that time. Now, you probably know it better than I, but that's what I'd been told. And I was interested in the field work as an important part of it. And anyway, my mother was delighted to move back because her whole family was back there.
That's what I was wondering.
She was one of 9 children, the oldest girl. And most of her siblings and their families were still in Chicago at that time. So she was very happy. She stayed here so that I could graduate. And then we moved back and to the University of Chicago, SSA.
Go ahead.
At that time had a pantheon of a faculty: Edith Abbott, Grace Abbott, Charlotte Toll. I mean, these are the gods, and they were all my teachers. I was determined to become a psychiatric social worker because that's where my interests lay, and that's what I hewed to, and that's what I graduated as. My first job, I decided in my wisdom that I needed a general background, a generic kind of background. So instead of applying for a job in a psychiatric clinic, I went to a family service agency, the Jewish Social Service Bureau in Chicago, which is very high standard, and which gave me an opportunity to work with all age groups, all sexes, families, groups, and individuals.
Do you remember who was directing the agency then?
Virginia Frank.
Virginia Frank.
Yeah, Virginia Frank. I went and had an interview with her, and it went swimmingly. And at the very end, she said, "I'm going to hire you. And it isn't because your sister-in-law is Dr. Margaret Gerard at the Institute." And I've never forgiven her for that. Because I suspected that had a lot to do with it.
Well, in 1950, she hired me.
1950, yeah.
And the only reason, as I understood it then, was because Arlene Johnson had sent her a glowing record of my past achievements, and she wanted to not disappoint Arlene. She was not interested in me.
Well, it was the same with me. It was the same with me.
Same kind of thing.
But then, of course, I had a number of supervisors. And in my 3rd year, I was given students to supervise from the University of Chicago. It's all in there. Also, I had the wonderful good fortune to have Esther Shouer as my supervisor. And she not only taught me what casework was about in a depth and degree to which I'd never been exposed before, but she enabled me to empathize with the least lovable segment of the caseload, such as the old Orthodox Jews who were stubborn and narrow, in my view. And I had an awful time working with them until one day she said, "Rhoda, think of them as poor devils." I'll never forget that phrase. And then she began to give me some idea of what had made them into what they were. And from then on, I had no problem at all. It was amazing how she could do that. She could enable you to empathize. And truly so, not just on the surface. So I had my first experience with students, and then I think it was, I can't remember if we went to St. Louis then or if I went to the Red Cross. I went to the Red Cross because of the war, and I felt I ought to do my bit. So I was head of a unit. I had about 8 or 10 workers under me, and I stayed there for a year or two, and then went down to St. Louis because Bernie was pursuing his plastic and reconstructive surgery training
there.
You
left out an important thing. You met Bernie along the way.
Oh, yeah. And I met him, of course, through the Shouers. Esther, who was my supervisor, was married to Isaac Shouer, who in his field was every bit as eminent, if not more eminent, and was Bernie's teacher, friend, collaborator, and mentor. And one day, Esther was driving me from the West Side office, which she headed, to the Loop for a case conference with Jenny Zetland about a difficult case. And on the way, I already had all sorts of secret fondnesses for Esther, but it was all very professional. Anyway, on the way, I blurted out, I'd just broken up with my boyfriend. This was a cousin of Bernice Simons, who was a brilliant guy. He was in the same freshman class as Bernie and got the top grade of anybody ever, but he was also impossible. He had dated me, and I had terminated. I couldn't stand him. So I said to her, I've just broken up with my boyfriend, and I'll never forget it. She gives a quick look at me. She's driving, and she said, you want to meet someone else? And I said, sure. She said, I'll give it some thought. And I knew, then and there, she'd find the right guy. So she went home, and she talked to Isaac, who had a whole stable full of young, professional Jewish men. And they went over them one by one, and they made a list. And Bernie was at the top, and then others that I came to know later. And boy, did they pick right. So, shortly after that, the histology department at the dental school, the histology department that Isaac was head of, had their annual picnic. And Esther always went to those affairs and also entertained them at home. And she went up to Bernie and she said, are you interested in meeting a nice girl? And he said, sure. So she said, well, if you are, give me a call and I'll give you give you her number. And then she told him about me. Well, nobody can write a reference like Esther could. So he did call her. And I'll never forget, by this time she was head of the Northwest office, and we were separated, but we were friends, so we'd meet for lunch. And she said, Rhoda, what are you doing tomorrow night? And what are you doing tonight? And I said, nothing. She said, well, you stay home. You're getting a phone call. So I stayed home. The phone call came. No, I got it wrong. She gave him the number, and a year later he called her for my phone number. A year later, and that's when she gave me a call and said, you better stay home. He's going to call you tonight. She didn't do things by half.
He was pretty slow.
Well, he was involved with his work. That came first, always did. And he was very, very busy with research and teaching and writing and all the rest of it. He liked girls, but he didn't have much time for them. So I called, and he tells me who he is, and I'm very pleasant about it. And he said, will you go out with me tomorrow night? At this point, he was a resident in plastic surgery at Cook County Hospital, and it was his night off. I said, I'm awfully sorry, I'd love to, but I can't. I have a date with a girlfriend, which I did, and I never believed in breaking a date with one person for another. And then he said, how about the next night? And I said, you're on. 5 months later, we were married. From that moment, and incidentally, the Shouers were away on vacation. They didn't know anything about this. Not a day passed that I didn't see him. If nothing else, he would drive to my office on the west side, which is where the Cook County Hospital was, take me home, go back to the hospital. If he had more time, we'd spend the evening together.
And it's only lasted 57 years? Pretty good, pretty good.
So, there actually wasn't one day that we didn't see each other somehow. And Betty Bosworth and Bernice Simon and I were inseparable triplets. Inseparable. To the point where we all had field work together. In our second year at the psychiatric clinic at Michael Reese. And there was a winding staircase that went to the ladies' room. And one day, Johnny Adlin Janess, who was our supervisor, whom we worshipped, saw the three of us coming down the steps, and she said, can't you three even go to the bathroom alone? I'll never forget that. Anyway, Bernie and I hit it off right from the word go. And got married on Christmas Day, 1941. And this Christmas, it'll be 57 years that we're together.
That's a very good record.
Huh?
It's a very good record, especially for a man who waited a full year before telephoning you.
And I attribute that, he called me all together to Esther's. She told him about me. I still can't live up to what she said, I'm sure. Anyway, they were wonderful. They were a very important part of our lives from then on. And I think of her all the time. I really do. I miss her. All right, so we're married. We were in St. Louis for 3 years while Bernie was getting his plastic surgery training with the #1 outfit in this country. Dr. Blair and his group. And I was working at the psychiatric clinic where I was lucky enough to have as one of my psychiatrists that I worked very closely with, Dr. Saslow, George Saslow. We shared marital couples, we shared families, and he taught me a tremendous amount. By the end of that time, I had to quit because we decided to have a family, and Jerry was born in St. Louis. When Bernie's 3 years were over, we moved back to Chicago, where he opened a private practice and started teaching at the medical school and dental school at Illinois. And I took time out from work. I worked half-time, I think, until we decided to have a second child. Joan came along about 2 3/4 years later. And by then we had Emma, who was our housekeeper, and one of the other blessings of my life.
Oh, you got her in Chicago?
Yeah. I got her through an ad. It was like a miracle. She was everything you'd want. She was my alter ego, like nobody else I've ever known in my life. And she had the same exact philosophy of child rearing that I did. She was neither too permissive nor too restrictive. She was just perfect. She was wonderful. Jerry adored her. And he stoutly maintains there's no connection, but his third child is named Emma. So I'm delighted because she contributed a tremendous amount. Jerry's a very tough kid, very difficult. Not bad, but willful and stubborn, and she knew exactly how to handle him. She taught me that she'd sit down next to the open toy box, and she'd say, "Come on, Jerry, let's play. Put away the toys," and they'd throw them in, and she'd do it with him. So he didn't know that he was cleaning up. And that was wonderful. Well, we moved out here again in 55, really because of the hay fever. Bernie is very allergic, and his summers were just miserable. And I was all for it. I was for anything that would move back to California. I wanted to so badly. So we came. Emma had to stay because she was married to the doorman at the Palmer House. And he had a job. But as it happens, about 6 years later, they both moved out here, and she resumed working for me until she died.
As I remember her.
Yeah. And we lent her husband the money for burial, and he paid every cent back. What else? You don't have to ask me many questions. You just...
Well, no, because you're on the right track. You're telling me about what you've done and why you did it. And now you're back in California in 1955.
Yeah, and I joined a private practice group. How did I happen to do that?
The one that was established by NASW?
No, we were on our own.
Oh.
They were psychologists and social workers. There were just 6 or 7 of us. And, I know, one of the members of that group, me at USC somehow, so it must have been later. And he asked me if I'd like to join. And I did. It was very good. I did all the intake, and I carried a caseload. And then I was home with the kids.
How did that work? How did that work, as being part of that group? Did you have common quarters?
Yes. Yes, we all had offices in one building. It was at Whitworth and Robertson.
And how did the clients come to you?
Word of mouth.
Did they come to the group, or were they referred to individuals?
No, they usually... We had a sign out, incidentally, in the window. It was called the Psychological Service Center of Los Angeles. And people would see that sign, and they would come in, or word of mouth. Mm-hmm. Somehow there was a steady stream. And this is where this girl I told you about, that I spent a good part of my life chasing after, she saw the sign.
Oh, so it was a fortuitous thing.
Absolutely fortuitous. And she decided, I got to get some help somehow, see what they can do for me. And she hit gold, if I do say it myself.
Then did you bill separately? I'm trying to see how this group operated. Or were all independent? You simply shared the same facilities?
We all shared the same facilities. We all had our own office. I would do the intake. Then I would present it at staff meeting. And each one would decide, I would like to work with that person. And so they were self-selected
But
there was no
really,
superior that made the assignments.
Yeah, so you worked on a collegial basis, and you were collaborating with each other in a variety of ways.
We had a psychiatrist, whose name I can't remember anymore, who we would go to if we had a problem with understanding or any problems in the case or needed drugs. He would always see the person, have an interview, and decide if he could be helpful with drugs. So I worked there for a number of years. I think until it was one of these that told me about USC.
Who?
I can't remember his name anymore, but he was an advisor. And he said, you'd like it there. They're awful nice people. And so I went and applied. And the dean was Simpson.
Malcolm Stinson.
Yeah, Malcolm Simpson. So I applied to him. He snapped me up. And I was an advisor there until Maury made me field director for many years. I was there half-time most of the time while the kids were little. So it worked out beautifully.
And what did you do as a half-time?
I had half of the student body that were my advisees. And when I first came there, I asked permission of every faculty member, must have done it with you too, if I could sit in on their classes, so that I would have some idea of what the students were talking about when they would come in, when they were having problems of any sort in the classes. I'd have some objective way of evaluating it. And then I would call conferences with all the classroom teachers. Oh, this is when I was director of fieldwork. Paolo, of course, was my boss. And I did advising. I mean, everything from helping them relate better to their classes, to working out problems with their instructors.
And the agencies where they were placed?
I was liaison for a bunch of agencies, as were many other people. Remember, the liaison
But faculty still had assigned agencies for which they were responsible.
And I had them too. And then when I became director, I had this whole group of liaison people. And when there were any problems, I'd call a meeting. Faculty people, the advisor, the student would sit in. At first I thought, gee, how are we going to work with the student right there? But it turned out it was invaluable. Because being brought together in a cooperative relationship, this sort of was the beginning of working things out.
Let me back up a little. I know that you were a volunteer with the mental health.
Yeah, this was before I went to USC.
Yes, where was that? Was that while you were still in private practice?
Yeah.
That was concurrent.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I would interview heads of agencies to try and find out what they were doing, what their goals were, and I forget exactly what all was involved. You would know through Al, because he was in charge of that whole program.
The survey was to find out what resources we had in the arena of mental health and what we needed. So would you think that this experience was helpful when you came into the school?
Sure it was, very much so, because I already, my fingertips on a whole bunch of agencies, and the directors of the agencies and the field instructors. So it was a perfect lead up to that job. It really gave me an advantage. I can't remember, any bad times. I really can't.
Some were more
some of the faculty were more cooperative than others, were more giving than others. Mm-hmm. I remember Helen Northern was never very giving, but I understood. That she was limited in that way, and I did what I could with her. But it was interesting because students would come with complaints, and yet I would never get into the position of being a complainer. Mm-hmm. But see, what could we do about the problem? And how do you see the problem? How do you see the problem? What can we do to work it out? And it worked out. Mm-hmm. So it was a good experience for me. It was wonderful background.
How long were you part-time?
I can't remember exactly. I think when both kids got into school, I went full-time. One was born in 48, and 6 years later was 52, and she was in kindergarten. And Jerry, of course, is already in full-time school. And we had Emma. I can't remember exactly. Mm-hmm. I've tried to figure it out in that thing there, and as close as I can. Yeah,
statement that
as close as I can.
Mm-hmm. You went, then you came into the school, and you worked under the supervision of Josephine Paolo.
Right.
She was the rector of Fieldwork at that time. And Malcolm Stinson
was the dean.
Was the dean.
And Malcolm Stinson would come around almost every morning, let's have coffee. And I said, dear God, don't let him come anymore. I got work to do. How can I get him to do that?
But his mode of working was really to have conferences over coffee and get to know people that way.
Well, I could never turn him down unless there was an emergency of some sort.
Then when did you come full-time to the school? Your biographical statement, your CV says 1962, is that right?
Yeah. Well, that's when I came to the school as an advisor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. It says here 62 that you were hired by USC, and then from 61 to 75 you were in private practice in Beverly Hills while you were working in the school.
So I must have been part-time.
Yeah. And in 1975 went full-time to the School of Social Work.
Yeah. That's when I became director of field work.
Uh-huh.
I think I was full-time before that, but I can't remember exactly, really.
Yeah. So you became director of field work, and how did your job change?
How did what?
How did your job change as director of field work?
Well, then I had top responsibility. All the liaison people reported.
I think this has just run out. No, it still has a little to go.
Okay. For one thing, I conducted a weekly seminar training new field instructors, which gave me a teaching opportunity. I had regular conferences with all of the liaison people. I would be involved. I would have the last word in approving or disapproving new field instructors. The agency would recommend someone. I would interview them, look at their background, and decide yay or nay. I would visit all new agencies, new applicant agencies, and study them to decide whether we'd use them or not.
By this time, were faculty still assigned certain agencies to work with? or was it all being done by the fieldwork division?
I think the faculty still was doing some liaison work.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't too happy about it, a lot of them. They had too much else, important things to do. And I think it did shift over time, but I can't remember exactly when.
How Schaefer come into the picture? Wasn't he involved?
He was fieldwork director before me.
He followed Josephine to Paolo.
Yes. And that wasn't a roaring success.
No, he didn't like that.
No, he didn't enjoy it. And I think he got out of it as soon as he could.
Mm-hmm. So you really followed him.
Yeah, and then I think Maury was dean then, and he...
Maury Hamovitch.
Yeah. And I've never gotten over the fact he had enough confidence in me to give me that job.
The full-time director.
I went to the senior peer counseling service. It was headed up by Monica White. And they had a group of lay people who visited the frail elderly in their homes and took them to the doctor and sought to help them with their life. And I met with them once a week and supervised them until once again I got to the point where the hearing was just in my way. And much to their sadness, I had a wonderful relationship with all of them. They just would glow. And I loved them, everyone. I quit. And
after how long?
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow, I forget why, I went back. And I'll never forget their faces when they saw me back. I stayed for a few sessions, and again, I simply couldn't hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided, I explained it to them, it was not a rejection of them at all. You know, I even had a sign with a megaphone, say, speak louder. And I put it down. But what happens inevitably is when you get involved with what you're saying, you forget. And like maybe I am with you now. And it just didn't hold up. So once again, I withdrew. The only volunteer work I'm doing now has nothing to do with speaking or with listening. I do all the talking. I present travelogues to Opeka. I've been doing this
to who?
Since Opeka.
But
it's the Old People's Information and Counseling Association. And what it is are a large group of very old, decrepit, almost as decrepit as I am, people. It's a daycare center for the frail elderly is what it is.
Where's it located?
At Missouri and Barrington.
In West Los Angeles.
It's Stoner, one block, west of Barrington and Missouri. And I went there and began presenting travelogues once a month. And I've been doing that since '83.
These are your own travels?
Yeah, my own travels, yeah. And some of them are sleeping, some of them are pacing, some of them are in another world. But I go happily on. I do all the talking, so I don't have to worry about hearing. When it comes to questions and stuff, Lynn, who's the one who's in charge, she's become a good friend. She's up there and she acts as intermediary. And it's amazing when I don't come because I'm on a trip or I'm sick, which is infrequent. Where's the picture lady? We miss the picture lady. And this from people who sleep through it.
Well, it probably helps them sleep more soundly.
Yeah. So I'm still doing that. That's about all I am doing.
Now,
I started something else.
Yes.
You know Anne Golan Turney?
Yes.
I happened to sit next to her at it was an affair for the Hebrew University, a fundraiser. And she asked me what I was doing, and I told her I'm not doing much. And she said, why don't you come to the Beverly Hills Library from 10 to noon on Mondays, where we go through books and shelving books, and you don't have to hear. There's nothing involved with hearing, and we'd love to have you. So a week ago Monday, I showed up. I was never so exhausted in my life. It means lit, put up, going down, and walking back and forth a million times for the books. I came home, and I've had a sore leg ever since.
Well, it's not funny.
Well, anyway, I called her. I didn't come last Monday. Frankly, I forgot all about it. So I called her today to apologize. And I said, but I cannot do that. She said, we don't intend for you to do. We're going to sit you at a desk and teach you how to price books. Because they sell a lot of the books. And you won't have to move. Just come. So that's what I'm going to do.
So you're going to do that.
Yeah.
But there's one phase of your volunteer activities that you haven't mentioned. And that's the zoo.
Oh, yeah.
And the animals.
Did I wonder if I put that up.
You,
I think
you
I
have
did.
a comment on that in your CV.
Yeah, docent at the LA Zoo.
Yes, but tell
10 years.
us, because the person who hears or sees your interview will be interested.
Yeah. Let me get a Kleenex.
Say that again.
I did that for 10 years. Loved every single minute of it. Made a friend who's a lifetime friend through it, because she and I happened to sit next to each other at the teaching sessions. That is, they give us a course that lasts quite a few weeks, about 26 weeks, I think. So we happened to sit together, hit it off. She lives in the same part of town I do, so we'd have lunch together, and we became fast friends. In 92, I decided that the faces of the animals were beginning to look too much like my family. So, and I discontinued it. But we're continuing our relationships. For example, we were down there not too long ago to quote adopt South American Tapir, which meant a $5,000 contribution. So we're still supportive, and I want to continue to be.
What kind of work did you do as a volunteer at the zoo?
We guided school children around the zoo. They would come with their teachers, and we would take. My way of doing it was to ask them what animals they were particularly interested in knowing about. Then I'd try to figure out a path that would include all the animals that they were interested in. If it was impossible, then I would tell them we'd have to cut some of them out. But usually the elephant, the tiger, the lion, these were the ones. And we would tell them about these animals. You know, we had studied. I had notebooks full of notes on them, 2 thick notebooks. And depending upon how interested they were, we'd tell them more or less. Some were, some weren't. But mostly it was school children on field trips.
Well, I see in your kitchen where we're conducting this interview that your wall is covered with pictures of animals.
Right. Well, these are most of them from this zoo. Not all. But I've always loved animals, you know. And this is my compensation. I can't have any animals. So this is the way I had my animals.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you traveled, which you did quite extensively, yes. Did you focus on animals in your travels, or?
Well, if ever there was a zoo, I would go to it. And also, we went to safaris in East Africa, in South Africa, Kruger National Park. So we went South America. We took an Amazon cruise. There were a lot of animals. So we had a number of our trips had an animal focus, yeah.
And these are the pictures that you show now in your monthly sessions. As the picture lady.
Yeah, right. Now, I have about probably 65 different trips, and 600 or 700 slides of organized zoo animals by different species. I don't show them that because I think that's too much for them. They're not really that interested. But if I take them to Africa, then the animals are part of the trip. I love going to the zoo, and we've made a connection with the new director. When we were down there for the Tabor, she took us in one of their little carts and took us all over the place and showed us all the renovations and stuff. So that's a nice.
Rhoda, besides being a paid professional and being an unpaid volunteer, you have made considerable contributions, you and Bernie, to the broad field of social welfare. Can you tell me a little about those?
Well, there's a Rhoda Sarnat Prize for the mental health section of the Institute of Medicine, Academy of Sciences. Can I get Bernie?
Sure.
I think he would.
Sure.
He's better at this than I am. Hold on a moment.
We're being joined by Dr. Bernard Sarnat, who has come in to help us to think about the kinds of contributions the Sarnats have made to the broad field of health and welfare. Bernie?
Well, several years ago, we established the Rhoda and Bernard Special Contribution to Social Welfare was made probably at the University of Southern California School of Social Work. That was some 10 years or so ago, where the Rhoda Sarnat Lectureship and also an assistant professorship award, as well as a student loan fund. This is recorded, I'm sure, in the School of Social Work, in case you need the specific information. A third place that Rhoda's contributed was the National Association of Social Workers to improve the image of professional social work nationally, and a prize is awarded each year for that, and that's been going on now for several years. More recently, a lectureship has been started at the Los Angeles Home for the Jewish Aging, and the first lectureship will be delivered next month in November. And then, in addition, over the many years, Rhoda's contributed to the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration to a student loan fund there. I think that summarizes it up to 1998.
I can think of two more things.
Of social
Yes, you contributed to the Hamovitch Research Center.
That is correct.
Which was a substantial one. And the Sarnat lecture that's held every year will be coming up.
Which I did mention.
November.
Yeah.
And I think there's a student, well, that's why I said, I think there's even this loan fund. I have to check the files at Southern California School of Social Work, which Rhoda established some years ago. That takes care of the social welfare areas, I think, pretty much.
Well, that's pretty good. I think it's nice to have contributions that continue in various ways.
Established the Sarnat Center at Brandeis University for the Study of Anti-Jewishness. This is an endowed fund which will go on in perpetuity because
a couple of things I want to show.
Because I think that anti-Jewishness is going to be around for a while.
Well, there's a new institute started at USC on the study of Jews in the Los Angeles area, Southern California, and these things I think do go together.
Yes.
Rhoda, now that we have looked at your history and your continuing contributions of various kinds, as you look back over the years, what do you think were you the most gratifying things about being in social work, in or out of the School of Social Work?
One thing, as I said earlier, it enabled me to understand people, their motivation, why they acted as they did, good, bad, or indifferent, which was a thirst that I had. Of course, a bonus along the way was the people that I met in this field who certainly aren't in it for money and aren't in it for glory, but are in it because they really want to offer something to make the world a little better. And I made wonderful friendships. And like all professions, it has many aspects to it, so that you can find the corner that suits you, no matter what it is, in terms of human relationships. I don't know what else to say. I've treasured it. I always think of it in terms of the 5 blessings. It's one of them. Bernie's another one. Emma's another one. The kids are another one. And social work's right in there.
Well, that's good. That's a very nice point on which to end. And thank you very much for this interview.
It was a pleasure.